welcome. I'm David Winstead, and welcome to the program In the Know on Channel 16 Montgomery Municipal Cable. I'm pleased you could join us today, and I'm really thrilled that Chrissy Nizer of the Motor Vehicle Administration is here today. Thank you for taking the effort to come. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be with you today.
Yeah. Well, Chrissy, I had, as you know, I had some years at MDOT and very much enjoyed them and worked with the MVA back in those days. And I guess just reflecting on the MVA and Marylanders and Montgomery County residents, you know, it's some of the great sort of incidents of one's life are associated with the MVA. Obviously, getting your driver's license and feeling freedom for the first time, and then buying your first car, and the dealer having to register the car and getting the titling through the MVA. So it has a very important function in the state of Maryland. So I thought it would be of interest to the public to really understand, the workings of the MVA and how you manage the delivery of these key services, which also includes revenues to the state of Maryland, which are quite healthy. But thank you for coming. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background as an opener?
Sure. Well, I've been with the state for 22 years, been in a variety of roles from supporting the General Assembly to the Public Service Commission, and even after 9/11, I had a brief time with the State Homeland Security Division. So a variety of experiences. My background's public policy, so I went to Goucher and then on to get my master's degree in public policy from Rutgers University. So, I love the idea of government helping people, and I think that's why MVA has been such a wonderful fit for me. I've been at MVA, MDOT over 15 years, and was fortunate to be named administrator a little over 6 years ago. But I love the idea of being able to touch the lives of everybody in the state of Maryland, exactly what you said, and making that a great experience. We've coined that phrase, premier customer service. We're trying to fight those old stereotypes that people might have in their minds about MVA customer service, whether it's in person or online, and some of the conveniences we've offered there.
Yeah. Well, so, I have one personal story that on the importance of the MVA. I took my elder son, my eldest child, to the MVA to get his license at a time in which, and you're familiar with this, the photograph of the governor and my photograph there, and he proceeded to fail the driving test. So that was his first exposure to the MVA. But, we've had, looking back in the last 2 years, I mean, it's been very challenging times for everybody. I mean, the employees, private sector businesses and government. And I know the MVA has made some major transitions over the last couple of years in terms of even pushing forward more technology so that you don't, you have the option of not going to an MVA branch to conduct a titling or driver's test or something of that nature. So give us a little update on how the unfortunate COVID experience really did, in fact, push, even more online customer service.
That's right. So obviously during COVID, everybody had to adjust, and our number one priority was the safety of our employees and the general public. Really, we shut down our branches maybe 6 weeks, but folks in back offices producing licenses, registrations, and titles were still working hard. Obviously, we've got an important role with the supply chain, so we were still testing commercial drivers, making sure they could get that duplicate or corrected license. So we actually opened even during those 6 weeks.
Isn't it?
It's a really big challenge.
I mean, you hear there are not enough truckers, and that part of the distribution issues during COVID were the lack of drivers, right?
That's right. So we never actually shut down those services. We kept open 1 day a week. We would have an emergency hotline that folks could contact us with, businesses, commercial drivers, emergency responders to come in and get service. And I just have to make a plug for our great employees. We talk about those frontline workers. I think of our MVA workers in the same way. They were out there. They volunteered to come in many cases to test those commercial drivers and make sure those services were provided. But as you said, we were very fortunate. We were working on a big IT modernization project. As you know, those projects are hard to get the dollars for, but we were fortunate that the state legislature authorized that for us. And for those who are familiar, we were on an old mainframe system. So we had to get COBOL programmers, which was increasingly difficult with time, right, to keep that maintained. So with our new system, we rolled it out with the first phase about a year and a half ago, and then most recently the second phase in December. So each of those deployments really allowed us to offer even more services online. For instance, our commercial drivers can now go online and complete many services that they could never do in the past.
Right. Interesting. So when you really look at, the divisions within MVA, it's sort of broken down into obviously licensing, commercial and private, and then titling. And that's a huge operation, isn't it? Just the ability of car dealers around the state to have a line into the MVA. And how does that work? It'd be interesting. I think people that buying cars would kind of like to know, the technology that links their new car with getting titled and tagged.
Sure, and that was the important business we had to keep operational because our dealers did keep running, and so we licensed the dealerships, the salesmen, actually driving schools and instructors as well. And so the dealers, when you go to your dealership and buy that new car and have that great experience, I know most people love the fact that they now get that actual hard plate and their registration all at the same time.
Right.
Obviously, many years ago that didn't happen, and that's because there's an electronic system that connects the dealer directly to the MVA so that all of that can be processed. Paperwork is now scanned in or sent electronically, so we don't have that same running of paperwork back and forth between both of us. So obviously the dealers are an important part of the industry, and the car industry as a whole is critical to the economy. So we work very closely with them, and especially during the pandemic, to make sure they kept operational.
So with some of these new vehicle stations like Carvana, has that changed much? It's the same basic theory, right?
It is the same basic. Carvana is a licensed dealer in the state of Maryland. I will say there's more interest in buying cars online. Even during the pandemic, it increased in terms of the interest of that. But the dealer laws in terms of where delivery takes place and all of those things apply. Certainly pieces have been modernized, but I think that'll continue to evolve over time as more and more unique and creative businesses come into existence.
Right. And so what is the base of the employment base of the MVA in terms of, it's located in Glen Burnie, Maryland, but then you have the branch offices here in Montgomery County. You have 2 or more?
We have 4 branch offices
in Montgomery County. But how does the sort of workforce get divided up between, head office versus the branches?
Sure. So we've got about 1,700 employees statewide, but as you said, most of those employees are really our customer-facing employees, those who are working in the branch offices. And so that really represents, a good 65% of our employee base. We do have folks at headquarters. I mentioned those folks that are printing licenses and ensuring titles get out. As well as our finance division and planning and those kind of operational folks that keep the business running. But yeah, most of our employee base is that customer agent that you probably interact with, maybe on the phone or in person at a branch office.
Right. And, back when I had my service as a secretary, I remember there were issues on the titling, I apologize, on the driver's license side where and I assume this has developed a lot since, but where there were some differences between the requirements for licensing in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, where I do recall that we had more demand on the MVA offices in Montgomery County, and that we were seeing even residents, from other parts. What's happened in that regard? I do remember we were sort of under an extra burden in terms of demand on getting a Maryland license versus, people that live in the metro area and might live in Virginia and DC. Can you explain sort of what's happened over the years for that?
Sure. So after the tragic events of 9/11, Real ID, as many people might have heard of, was adopted. And so that set universal standards for driver license issuance. So in many ways, most jurisdictions are now, providing the same issuance standards in order to get that license, which has helped quite a bit. The other benefit is we're now electronically verifying those documents being presented, so we know the security of of you are who you present yourself to be is
Okay.
there. So for
Right.
instance, we verify your Social Security number with Social Security Administration. If you present a passport, we're going to verify that as well. A lot of documents we're able to electronically verify with the issuing agency. So it gives everybody that sense of confidence. We know that the driver license or the ID card we issue is probably less frequently used for the intended purpose, meaning to drive, than
Right.
it is for identification. And so we take that responsibility seriously. And that was really the whole goal of the Real ID Act in terms of making sure that we were all applying those same standards.
Gotcha. Well, I think we might, Chrissy, might take a few minutes a break here. And so thank you for joining. We'll be right back with Chrissy Nizer of the Motor Vehicle Administration.
If you love them enough to relearn math so you can teach them math, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.
Well, welcome back. I'm David Winstead, and this is In the Know program, and we're really pleased to have Chrissy again here, Chrissy Nizer, a Motor Vehicle Administrator. And we've been talking a little bit about the importance of technology for the licensing functions and all of that. I think it'd be interesting to understand what the initiatives were countrywide to create higher security, a driver's license, and also to make sure there wasn't differences between states. What's kind of, I know you're the head of the National Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a great role. So you do have a federal kind of or national spokesperson position there. So give us a little sense. I don't think people really understand, what goes into the driver's license, the technology with the chip, and all the things that you're trying to make better.
So yeah, it started with the Congress passing, obviously, the Real ID Act, and then the Department of Homeland Security and the regulatory process that they went through. We have been actively working to implement those in Maryland. I have to say over 85% of Maryland residents are Real ID compliant. Really proud of that.
Right. You said that's one of the highest,
It
right?
is one of the highest. Nationally, it's about mid-40s, and so you can see we compare pretty well when we look at that. But it is about getting everybody on the same page in terms of license issuance standards. And you'll notice if you have a Real ID, you have a star on your license, and that tells the person who is viewing that license that you've met those Real ID standards. So they have the confidence that you've been vetted from an identity, from a Social Security, and a residency standpoint. In the past, there were not consistent standards from state to state. It was not always the same.
What problems did that? I'm just being curious. I know we don't have that, but what did you have? I referenced my one experience years ago. Did you have sort of people shifting to where it was easier to prove residency and stuff like that?
That's right. Residency especially. The other documents obviously have security features, but with residency it is a little tougher, and so that's why we electronically verify every document we can. We also do address verification with the U.S. Postal Service. So we want to check it's a legitimate address. We want to check that it's actually a residential address, which is the requirement under state law. And now actually we mail the license. So most folks who have come and gotten a license within the last 6 or 7 years or so know that they leave with that receipt and they get that license mailed to them. Part of that is the security of making sure you actually reside where you tell us you reside, and also the product itself. Take a close look at it one time. You'll notice a lot of security features. Some are visible, some are not visible. We actually looked across the world to find the best security features. I like to say we have one of the most secure licenses in the country. And there are many things. There's a variable image you'll see at the top with your photo in there. There's some things that are embedded in the license itself. And so it's all about making sure, again, that person who's receiving it has confidence in your identity and who you are. Whether that's that law enforcement officer at 2 o'clock in the morning in that dangerous situation, whether it's TSA when you're boarding that airplane. We know, again, licenses are used for many things not related to MVA business. And so we hold that as a very important part of our mission.
And Chrissy, you mentioned that the TSA Pre-Check is an additional service which I I don't think a lot of people recognize that the MVA can, in fact, help in that. Can you explain that?
Sure. In embracing that idea of premier customer service, we've looked at other opportunities to help serve our residents. And so TSA Pre-Check is one of them at some of our branch offices, where you can actually make an appointment online to get that pre-check completed. And then you'll work with one of our agents, one of our customer service agents, and go through the process and be able to get that issued. And what a convenience.
Well, Chrissy, isn't there,
for folks
I mean, just
to do that.
comment, isn't that like a huge area of opportunity? I had my youngest daughter, you know, for some reason, her fiance has clearance on TSA Pre-Check. She had it, but something happened. She just talked to me about this last week. Something happened where she, you know, she got to the airport, her fiance was able to go through and she wasn't. She had to. So, and you know, if the alternative is dealing Customs and Border Protection, correct?
That's right, that's right.
So, I mean, I would suspect that the setup of MVA in Maryland and the, you know, the new IT and virtual application, that, boy, I would think there'd be a lot of demand for that.
It's been very popular, and you know, we've tried to look at it for different things. For instance, we're also piloting issuing birth certificates in some of our branch offices. So somebody comes in, they want to get that license or ID card. If you were born in Maryland after a certain date, we can actually issue your birth certificate if you don't have it, to allow you to complete that transaction. Prior years, that person would have had leave, get the birth certificate, however long that took them, and make an appointment to come back again. So again, it's all about that customer convenience. What can we provide to them right at that point of transaction to make it a little bit easier? And again, it's about serving every resident. How do we meet them where they are and provide that great service?
And under Real ID, that was started by Homeland Security, by the end of or middle of 2023, all the states are supposed to have what Maryland's already got 83% done, right? I mean, that's the objective.
So by that date, they're going to actually use your individual compliance with Real ID. So at that point, when you go through the checkpoint at one of the airports, they're going to check to make sure you have a Real ID. At this point, it's based on state compliance. So as long as Maryland or whatever state you live in is compliant, you're good. But what they're working for, as you said, May 2023, is the idea that they will check your individual compliance. Do you have a Real ID? So the fact that we have 85% of our population is great. Many people will come in, obviously, in that next year and a half we have until that deadline, and obviously we'll do a lot more education to make sure folks are aware.
So given the discussions you hear in the media constantly, and you know, the more conservative side versus liberal, about national IDs, the reality is the states are providing that, right, through Real ID and through each individual driver's license, and the technology behind it, the information that's available to law enforcement, to, you know, that's really serving the driver's license is really serving.
It's setting a standard for what that is. Certainly many countries have that standard in terms of a national ID. We never had as a state. And really the federal government can't set standards in terms of what states can do, but what they can say is we won't accept the license unless it meets those standards. So if you're not issuing a Real ID, the license has to be marked not for federal purposes, and then obviously it wouldn't be accepted at those TSA checkpoints or other federal purposes.
Right. So what's happened in technology and the old experience of a kid at 16 trying to get his driver's license? Is that still pretty much the standard? They've got to go to an MVA office, they got to be tested and do online. Can they take the driver's license test online and then come for the driving portion?
So that's actually something we're working on. I will say we had worked with a lot of schools pre-pandemic, and they were actually taking the knowledge test in the schools. It was a great partnership we had where we would come in and administer the test, the kids would take it in an environment they were a little more comfortable with, let's be honest. When they come to the MVA, they get a little nervous, and then come to the MVA and complete the process. So that is pretty much the same at this point. Nothing more exciting than seeing that first-time licensee. You can always tell how they did on the test by the reaction on their face.
But looking out 3 years, do you think the written portion will be done more on the school level and less at the MVA?
So we actually are in the process of purchasing a new law test system, and actually part of that request for proposal was an online solution. We think that is something that should happen in the next few years. So it's kind of the next step forward. As you said, we did a pretty major IT deployment, and that's another important step to take in terms of law test.
Well, you know, your boss, Larry Hogan, I know quite well, and he's done a remarkable job of sort of dealing with the mobility issues of Maryland, and you know, and all through Maryland, East and Western Shore of metropolitan Baltimore, Washington. And we have seen with the approval, and the Board of Public Works, I think both Peter Franchot and the governor voted to support the lane widening to put HOV lanes on I-270 and then widen the bridge to match the Virginia lanes, which they've way ahead of us on and have been. But that mobility commitment, I'd be interested, the MVA has a huge safety program called I'm the Driver, right?
That's right.
Or Be the Driver. Be the Driver. So my perspective, and I can speak as a former MDOT secretary, my perspective is congestion is the major problem for aggressive driving and behaviors on the highway systems and through communities. The Channel 16 had about 6 months ago a program on sort of Vision Zero of what can a community do to input more sort of traffic calming ideas in their community, and then strengthen the pedestrian crossings and things of that nature. But I'd just be interested in your perspective. It's been approved that we're going to go ahead with the I-70 and the bridge portion of widening it. It seems to me a project like that does alleviate some of the causes of unsafe driving, right? People
frustration.
I think what I understand from that is that both in the general use lanes and the HOV lanes, there is an increase in mobility, maybe 27% increase in some of those. So how does that all translate to the safety objective that MVA has? I mean, and I know the state police are a partner in that regard, but I'd be interested in.
Yeah, so we have a highway safety office at the MVA, and that Be the Driver campaign is all about each of us. Every time you get behind the wheel, we have a responsibility not only for ourselves, but anybody else in the car. So whether it's buckling that seatbelt every time, or making sure that you're not impaired in any way, speeding, and then distracted driving, all of those things are critical. I'd say during the pandemic, some of the things that we thought we knew about traffic safety got really questioned because, you know, there were fewer people on the roads, but people were driving at really high rates of speed. They were doing these maneuvers we heard about on 495, for example. They're doing donuts and turns on 495, incredibly dangerous. And so even though there was less traffic on the roadway, considerably less traffic, we actually saw our fatalities go up on the road. And
that's
so
a national
it is a national trend. And so you know, that's something that we're having to constantly re-educate the public and work with all the law enforcement partners, certainly, in terms of making sure that speed stays down and that dangerous behavior. Those are the two things that I think we've really seen come out of the pandemic that we're concerned about. Because when nobody was on the road, maybe we could drive a little faster, but now people are back out and, you know, going about their business. People are trying to still drive at that high rate of speed, which becomes incredibly dangerous.
And so you do feel that, you know, both the grid systems in Maryland and the demand of drivers, that, you know, we're never going to have a situation where congestion disappears, right? And even you think about technology in cars. I mean, fortunately, technology in cars is, you know, is helping in terms of emissions, right? More electric cars, more hybrid cars, and less, you know, gas-driven cars, the better in terms of the environment. But sort of looking out at 5 years, and if some of these things, for example, the schools are now delivering or offering up driver's tests. You know, you're now way above 50% people that do their business with the MVA online. So, you know, technology. What role, for example, will devices hold, like the smartphone? You know, I do understand that certain brands of smartphone are, in fact, have apps or trying to encourage and work with the MVAs to essentially allow for a driver's license to be on an iPhone. Is that correct? Where is that development? Where, in terms of
Yeah, it's an exciting development. So, and again, it's another step forward from a security standpoint. And the reason I say that is because when you hand your license over to somebody, it's really about, cashing a check or maybe a loan transaction that you're trying to do. There may be certain information they need on the license, but do they need all of it is the question. And so with a mobile DL, and it was announced in the summer of last year that we were partnering with Apple to have a Maryland license available in the Apple Wallet for Apple users who live here. So coming later this year, more to come on that. And again, it's an option for customers, but the great benefit is if you wanted to use that license because maybe you were making a purchase of alcohol, the only thing they really need to know is you're over age 21.
Got it.
Right now, today, they see your exact date of birth, they see your address, they see all that information, and so under new mobile DL, all they see is your photo and that you're over 21 years of age. So we think it's an important step forward in security.
Exciting. So one last question, Chrissy. The MVA, I noted, just because I was looking at it, that the MVA in terms of user fees and revenues generated from titling of cars, from all of that, I might have this wrong, but I think it's the second biggest generator of revenues in the state of Maryland. And yet I don't think people understand, I do because of my background at MDOT, but that money goes into many other purposes through the Maryland Transportation Trust Fund, correct?
That's exactly right.
So you're generating close to $1 billion a year or over $1 billion a year. Can you just explain to people that role you play in Maryland in terms of the sharing of revenues for other transportation or safety or mobility interests?
Sure, it's a really important function. We keep very little of what we generate in revenue. It really does all go to those road projects and other transportation projects that are critical to all Marylanders throughout the state. And so, whether it's that car that you're buying and you're paying your excise tax, maybe you're renewing your vehicle registration or paying your driver license fee, all of that revenue really goes directly to the Transportation Trust Fund to be used for all those important road projects. We also do collect some funds for some other groups that I know are probably pretty close to people's hearts, like the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, if you want to get one of those plates, or the Agricultural Foundation. Also, every registration contains an EMS fee, which goes to our helicopter and emergency fund. So, there's a lot of things. I know nobody wants to pay fees, obviously. It's not something anybody looks forward to, but these are certainly important efforts that we're supporting as you come and pay that registration or licensing fee.
Well, that's great. Well, Chrissy, thank you. It's been great to have Chrissy Nizer here from the Motor Vehicle Administration, and thank you for coming. And really, I think it's fascinating what the MVA does, and the fact that our identity is so linked to the MVA. I think everybody has gained a lot from this conversation. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. And we'll see you at the next session of In the Know. And again, on behalf of Channel 16, Montgomery Municipal Cable, thank you for joining.